declaration of the Monroe Doctrine, named for the President of the United States. It's announced by the Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, which the Monroe Doctrine becomes a central tenet of American foreign policy, essentially saying the Americas should be left for the American people to determine, Europe should stay out, and in return, the United States will stay out of European affairs. Although it's a nice statement and it made the Americans feel good, was the United States strong enough to impose this on Spain or Portugal or other European powers? And at that point, it was not. Who actually is going to want to see the Latin American countries independent?
Britain.
Yes. And how are they able to make that happen? They don't need U.S. help. What does Britain have? Yes, the British Navy controls the seas. If Britain doesn't want Spain and Portugal to send troops over, can they prevent it? Okay, and so they do. And so it's essentially the British Navy that makes the Monroe Doctrine actually operate. And Britain obviously wants to exploit the economic opportunities of independent countries in Latin America. So in Latin America, because of Britain's position, the great powers are unable to prevent revolution, prevent nationalism. The other area, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, is a revolt in Greece, also in 1820. Who controls Greece?
Yeah.
Okay. And the Greek revolt is going to last, actually it's going to go on for about 10 years. Initially, the great powers are not going to be supportive of the Greek revolt, but eventually they will intervene. What dynamics would you guess perhaps come into play? Why this Greek revolt might sort of gain some popular support or some support?
Push back the Ottomans.
Okay. And why would a revolt against Ottoman control be seen somewhat sympathetically in the West?
They're Muslim, aren't they?
Yes. Okay, so you still have some of that. You also have the Greek patriots tapping into the ancient Athenian sort of, democracy, liberalism, the birthplace of a lot of Western values. And is that appealing to educated Europeans? Because what is still at the core of their education? Yes, going all the way back to the Renaissance, harkening back to the ancients. Classical, the classical element in education is still very powerful. A lot of the educated people have been reading about the Greeks and the Romans, and they see this as a sort of a new Greek struggle against sort of the alien, Persian or Ottoman Empire in this case. And so gradually popular opinion, at least, especially in Britain and France, is going to sort of want to see support for that. And so the Greek revolt will ultimately succeed, and you will have an independent Greek kingdom established in 1830, 1831.
Why were they not afraid, though, that the reawakening of those kind of republic ideals, like they would inspire more people?
They were, and for the first 5 or 6 years of this revolt, the Metternich in Austria basically was unsympathetic to what was going on, and there was not any great power support for this revolt. Part of what tipped the tables was the Ottoman attempts at putting down the revolt became extremely repressive and brutal. And you had some wonderful propaganda paintings, and we'll see a couple of those, of sort of the Greeks being massacred on some of the islands, the massacre at Chios, and things like that, that are going to tug at European heartstrings, plus some pretty sophisticated appeals to Europeans. You also will have some of the Romantic artists, poets, John Keats, Shelley, who will go and in some cases actually try to join the Greek patriots in their revolt and write poems. Have you guys ever read Ode to a Grecian Urn?
Yeah.
Okay, written at this time, celebrating the ancient Greeks. So you have this influence, and so eventually you're right that initially they're not supportive, but eventually they will change. And we'll do that. Last 2 points, moving on. That's the international side. Internally, you will have a lot of repression. And this is particularly in the German Confederation. It's often known as Metternich system, named for the foreign minister of Austria, who was kind of able to dominate Central Europe, where Austria is still very strong, in cooperation with Prussia. And they mentioned in the textbook the Carlsbad Decrees. And essentially what this is in these German states, they've had a taste of liberalism. They have had a taste of nationalism. And there are Germans who would like to see Germany united. And as we know, they will start to unite economically in the Zollverein. There obviously is still an interest in political union. This is particularly true in the universities among students and some of their professors. And so you have these groups known as the Burschenschaft, which are these sort of student associations that discuss the ideas of the Enlightenment, of progress, of nationalism, of liberalism, of representative government, of individual rights. And the Austrians and the other conservative powers get very worried about these groups, and the Carlsbad Decrees are aimed at eliminating them and suppressing them. In part, it's because one of the members of these Burschenschaft actually assassinates a leading figure, and let me see if I have his name. Yeah, Kotzebue, there's a guy named Kotzebue who is assassinated by one of the members of this. He was a fairly prominent conservative thinker figure. And so the Carlsbad Decrees basically impose censorship on the universities, shut down the student unions, report and with spies on what professors are teaching and saying. There's a lot of censorship of the press. And so the Carlsbad Decrees are part of this Metternich system to try to keep these ideas associated with the French Revolution out of circulation. It will not be entirely successful, but it will maintain stability and order. Okay, so far so good. Is that, any questions? Took a little bit long, I guess, but let's move to conservatism. They mentioned the formation of the Holy Alliance. Who belongs to the Holy Alliance? And what is it saying? No?
Is Austria, Prussia, and Russia?
Yes.
Isn't it aimed at protecting Roman Catholicism?
It's kind of the same.
Okay. It is aimed at upholding, or it sort of brings together these conservative monarchies. And there's actually a little bit of irony. It's sort of kind of like the Holy Roman Empire, where some people point out that it's not that holy, it's not that Roman, and it's not really much of an empire. The Holy Alliance is a little ironic too, because the agreement, it's sort of Alexander's sort of brainchild, and again, he was instructed by Catherine the Great. He is seen as having liberal leanings early in his reign. But the agreement basically says that these three powers will maintain order according to Christian principles. The irony being,
Socialism?
what Christian views do these three countries have? What's the official religion? What's Austria's official religion? What is Prussia's? What is Russia's? Do they all agree on the Christian principles? What has been the relationship between those three Christian denominations over time? Yeah. So for them to agree that they're all going to rule according to these Christian principles, that's kind of the irony. But they all are conservative monarchies with established churches, aristocracy playing a key role, at least in Russia and parts of Prussia, serfdom still in effect. So there is a fair amount of agreement politically there.
If they were going to rule according to Christian values, wouldn't socialism kind of be more appealing to them? Like according to